So more formally, open source is actually defined by a series of software licenses that define some basic rights. We can characterize the general rights as the following. As I mentioned, practically everybody has the right to make copies of the program and distribute these copies. You have the right to access the center of the program, the kernel, which in other types of software development projects is actually proprietary. You cannot access that. You cannot modify the code, not even to study it. It's restricted in access. And once if you want, you can actually improve the program to fit your needs. Now, there is a lot of debate whether how this, as Martin suggested, is it an example of what we may say a classical liberal vision, or is it an example of a more utopian vision? Not to say, I don't want to say socialist or communist because it wouldn't be that way. And in fact, part of the confusion about this type of production stems from the fact that there is a distinction. There is a distinction between open source software and free software. The distinction is actually more, let me put it, on ideological ground than actually on grounds of software licenses, because the software licenses that govern open source software projects overlap almost entirely, as you can see from the graph, with the licenses that govern free software projects. The difference is that in open source, what they do is they stress the commercial viability of open source software. In free software, what they do is they try to say, we want to change the world with free software. Even though, as you see, the definition is actually one that is classical liberal. You have the rights of access, as in free speech, not in free beer. But at the end of the day, what they practice is sort of a utopian vision whereby they want to change everybody's mind and say, look, the Microsoft way of production is bad, and the free software one is good because it's like a commune. It's a communist kind of production. But in actually, my talk was going to say that it is actually the opposite, as Martin alluded. Now, it is important to underline, the penguin refers to Linux. The penguin is to Linux, and Debian is the project I mentioned before. That the essence of open source software is a collaborative volunteer software production mode that relies on shared code and open standards. Open standards, we heard this morning, abstract rules that Eliana said. You can think of open standards as the common interfaces or the common abstract rules that govern the production of open source. In Aiken terms, that's what it is really. And the shared code is simply the source code that a bunch of volunteers share and improve upon and study upon. So there's a lot of learning from trial and error. That's the key. At the same time, what is important, and this is also most often misunderstood, is that the fact that you have an open source output, which is the software that can be opened and modified to fit your need, does not necessarily mean that the organizations producing that software, which is open, are also open in the same way. In other words, it is important to make the distinction that open source software can be produced, yes, by voluntary production mode, as I alluded. That's the most interesting case for us. But even corporations produce open source software. So for profit, they produce open source software. So volunteers does not mean necessarily that people are not remunerated for what they're doing. It simply means that they select what they want to contribute without anybody telling them. And that's where the spontaneity element comes in. So this is very important. So we can distinguish at least three types of production: the corporate, the hybrid, which is a mix of corporate and voluntary, and the voluntary. And obviously we're going to focus on the voluntary. Now, part of the misunderstanding about what surrounds open source software production is the fact that Eric Raymond, I have a slide on him in a second, in 1999 published a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. Before that book was published, he had the same papers that ended up in the book online. So they've been around for a variety of years, these papers characterizing how open source software production is different from the corporate one. So he drew this parallel, which actually captured the interest of many, but it captured the interest of many without really thinking that the parallel that he drew was actually about ideal types and not concrete organizational forms. However, most scholars took these forms to be concrete. So they were saying you can divide the open source production mode in two big fields. The one is the bazaar, and the other one is the cathedral. As the names imply, as the metaphor imply, in the cathedral mode of software production, the process is top-down. I tell everybody what to do, and everybody follows my instructions. More technically, we'll say it is like a Fordist from Ford type of production process, or it's a type of production process where the coordination of activities is top-down instead of bottom-up. Or in other words, you can also say that the process of production is undertaken according to fiat or direction or power instead of equal relationships. On the other hand, the other ideal type, which unfortunately also got concrete form, is the bazaar. In the bazaar, as the name implies, it would be like the souk in the Middle East or the Northern African souk. There is interactions at the bottom level, not at the top level. So everybody's on an equal footing. There is nobody directing them in terms of production, exchange, or anything like that. So he's saying the bazaar, Raymond claims, is actually comparable to a spontaneous order. Okay? In some ways, he's not completely off the mark. There are some aspects of spontaneity. But it is important to understand that actually we don't face an order, but we face an organization. Okay? The difference, one of the basic differences is that in an organization, at least the way we need to use it today, in Aikian terms, you have that it has an end. It moves towards a telos, a fundamental objective. And that's what open source does, even the voluntary type. What's more important is that actually in a bazaar purely constructed, you wouldn't have any hierarchy at all. Instead, in the bazaar, in the concrete world, you have hierarchy. There's not complete decentralization. The hierarchy may be flatter, but it's there. For example, if you consider Linux, Linus Torvalds, who invented Linux practically, has complete control, and his team as well, over what gets accepted into the program, into the operating system. You cannot just submit parts of it and it will be automatically accepted. So there is some fiat, there is some direction. This is crucial. And this automatically distinguishes from the ideal type of the bazaar. So part of the purpose that I saw my research doing was actually characterizing in more realistic terms what the bazaar is about. And here is what it looks like more concretely. Now, in the cathedral software production or development, you have that practically 4 steps. You have a firm that develops the code. The code is locked, and this is critical. It is locked in the sense it's proprietary. You cannot access it. We, as the customers, run the program. And then if a bug appears, that's the fly there, if there's a glitch, a problem, you can report it if the program allows you to. How many of you have found in Windows you want to report this problem to Microsoft? That's an example of reporting. But the point is, it's not immediate. You don't know what happens. You're not part of that, of that knowledge exchange. You just submit something, and then if they want, they fix it. And it may take 3 years before it gets fixed, for example, if at all. And actually, the new releases are even worse than the old ones sometimes. But the key is that the code is locked. Okay? In the bazaar type of development, you have the code that's developed by the volunteer community. The code is distributed to the users. Users create the binary, which is what you need to run the program, and then the users run the program itself. If there is a bug and I'm the user, I can fix it. And then I can also modify the program to fit my needs. I can tailor it, so I can customize it if need be. And this leads to a resubmission of the modified program to the top level, so to speak, to the community. This is so good and so nice, but it doesn't really give us a theory of what's going on. So we need a theory that tries to explain how we can actually characterize the nature of this production process. And of course, it would start with the idea of dispersed knowledge, because it is obvious that open source software production capitalizes, does not see as a constraint, but sees as an option the fact that knowledge is dispersed. It tries to capture that dispersed knowledge. So this is the knowledge of particular circumstances of time and place, which we can call tacit, following Michael Polanyi, and dispersed knowledge. One aspect of this that Hayek left out is the idea that if you want to move the knowledge to the decision makers, if you want to move the knowledge that you need to the decision makers having that knowledge, you might as well give them the right to use that knowledge. You might give away the rights of knowledge use instead of constraining that knowledge use.